Today I'm largely leaving the gospel to one side and I'm going to preach on Paul's letter to the Corinthians. Now, I noticed, and this is no judgment on you, Sue, that the language is difficult, isn't it? Paul's language translated into English is difficult. Paul has a knack of writing paragraphs with no sentence breaks, no full stops, and lots of semicolons to try and figure out what he means. So today, I thought I'd focus on that reading, and primarily, he's focusing on influence and love. Okay, so that's influence and love. Keep that one in the back of your head. I'm going to tell you a story to start. When I was about 10 or 11, my then stepfather started asking me to light his cigarettes for him. He even showed me the correct way to hold them and to draw on them so that they lit properly. He'd sometimes give his smoke back to me to finish. This made me feel very grown up. I didn't know anyone else my age that was allowed to smoke and had their parents' blessing, no less. I would show off to all my friends when I was out. I had no idea how dangerous smoking was or how addictive. Before long, I was smoking whole cigarettes and then whole packets of cigarettes. My mum, who was complicit in this, and my stepfather needed to buy me my own cigarettes because I had no means of earning any money to buy them for myself. I was too young. They didn't seem to mind though. By the time I was in high school, I was completely addicted to cigarettes, and my stepfather had made a rod for his own back. Around this time, our family life had become pretty ordinary, turning into awful. And cigarettes became my preferred coping method. Roll on a decade or so, and my oldest kids were pretending to smoke using pencils and straws, pretending to be like mum and dad. My mother, their grandmother, thought this was cute. I didn't. Smoking was also really expensive. Not as expensive as today, where you can almost buy a small car for the same as you pay for a packet, but not quite. Smoking was very expensive in comparison to what we earned. And I noticed it was creating a negative influence on my kids because there was not always enough money to eat and to smoke, and of course I chose smoking over eating. So there were compromises on food quality and quantities in order to perpetuate my habit. It was all but impossible to give up. I tried lots and lots of times, but only ever managed a short period of time before giving in and starting again. Eventually though, after we caught our then 8-year-old picking up his grandfather's butts from the yard and actually smoking them, I decided enough was enough, it was time to quit. So I gave up, or rather, we both gave up, together, and that seemed to be the formula that worked for us. It was tough. One of the toughest things I have ever done. Beating addiction is more than just stopping bad behaviour. It's about changing the story that feeds that behaviour. Anyway, roll on another decade or so, and my 3 oldest kids were either smoking or had smoked for a while. So it didn't seem to have worked. They told me back then that it didn't seem too bad for you guys when you smoked. And if you, our parents, had done it and it was cool, then it was okay for us to do it. They also didn't realise how addictive it was, even though I told them. Another decade on, and none of my kids smoke, thank goodness. Thank goodness. They didn't want their kids to smoke. Funny that, hey? They wanted to be good influences. Then there was this one time I remember when Jamie, the eldest daughter, said to me, "You know, Mum, I remember when you and Dad gave up smoking. Dad slipped a couple of times, but you never did. You made up your mind to do the right thing and not smoke because you didn't want us kids to smoke and you just did it. She made it sound really simple. She continued by saying, I remember how strong you were and how committed to achieving your goal, and I hope to emulate you in all those decisions I make with my family. It was such a powerful affirmation of positive influence. I was very proud and ashamed all at the same time. We can never quite appreciate how much influence we have on another at any given point. This is especially true when we don't, or worse, won't pay attention. I have been the victim of negative influence and perpetuated both positive and negative influence, unwittingly and intentionally, as we all have. Paul tackles these issues of influence today in his letter to Corinth. Paul is drawing our attention to influence, both positive and negative, and the impact they can have knowingly and unknowingly. The reading is not actually about food, just as the sermon is not about cigarette smoking. Paul is talking about love. More specifically, the divine sacrificial love of Christ. And more subtly, he's speaking of our access to God by way of being created in God's image. I've written a convoluted sentence like Paul does. We are brothers and sisters with Christ and therefore heirs with Christ, connected to God and his sacrificial love. Paul is talking about choice and behaviour and influence, about choosing to be an intentional good influence rather than an unintentional bad one. First, though, I thought I'd give you a little bit of context. If we can have the next picture, please, Katie. So it's hard to see. I tried to draw a circle. Corinth sits on the edge of what's called the Isthmus of Corinth. It's a difficult thing to say, the Isthmus of Corinth. It's a narrow stretch of land that joins the Peloponnese Peninsula to the mainland of Greece. And it's defined by that canal that was in the previous picture. It's roughly halfway between Athens and Sparta. In the first century, when Paul is active, it was a major shipping and trade route and was a place of great wealth and also great corruption. Corinth was full of people, thousands and thousands of people from every different nationality, religion, culture and background. And like modernity, there were many different religions. A few mainstream, but mostly lesser or unorthodox ones that just kind of spring up. Perhaps you might think of India, a place where each village or each community almost has a different god or goddess that they pray to. And you'd have a bit of an idea of what Corinth looked like back then. There were many thousands of different people praying to hundreds of different gods. Because this was a trade port and full of activity, there were also every social and economic status of person, and also like modern times, there was a disconnect between the extremely wealthy and the extremely poor, as well as the well-educated and the ignorant. Of course, there were those who had some rudimentary education and they could sometimes improve their lot in life, but very few who were well-educated, like Paul. Naturally, these few ran the show and had the biggest influence. The vast majority of people, however, were the poor and uneducated, those whom Jesus came to minister to. They were at the mercy of those who should have known better. And the city teemed with beggars and outcasts who literally lived a hand-to-mouth existence from your hand to their mouth. The poor in particular were severely disadvantaged by educated people of means, influencing them in a negative or a derogatory manner, unintentional or otherwise. So Paul and his band of Christians living in Corinth had seen all this firsthand, and they'd seen what they were up against. Not only converting people to Christianity, but upholding its ideals. And I might suggest that that's one of the reasons Christianity endures, is its ideals. Paul says, don't let your influence be unintentionally misguided. That's the crux of what he's saying. Remember, the ignorant don't understand, and the wealthy will use your actions as justification for extortion of the vulnerable. Neither are desirable. You don't want to disobey Jesus' directive to always care for the poor. And we all know that caring for the poor is more than simply feeding them or giving them a handout. They should benefit and not be disadvantaged by our wealth, our education, and our opinion. This is important. In first century Corinth, there are many looking to the Christians to see what they do. These followers of Jesus often buy, then eat the food offered to false gods. Why? Perhaps because Jesus said it's not what goes into the mouth or the stomach that defiles, but what comes out of the mouth. These Christians perhaps naively assume everyone knows this. As long as they say it is for Jesus, it doesn't matter what they do. This food offered to gods is always the best quality simply because it was selected as a sacrifice. What does it matter, they argue, if it's eaten or sold by those who don't believe in that God? So Paul offers words of caution which we can understand and take on board. Paul says it doesn't matter that you know the truth. What is seen on the outside and perceived in the heart is of more importance to the perceiver. You must not only be seen to be doing the right thing, but must understand why it's the right thing and why it's so important. Talking the talk as well as walking the walk comes to mind. The message for us is no less compelling. How are we perceived? What do people see when they look at us and our actions? More than that, what is the truth when they notice us? What do our actions tell others of the kingdom of God or the inheritance of Christ? What do they say about the acceptance and inclusive nature of God? If we offer division, ignorance, argument, and disunity within our own lives or social circles, then what are we professing or showing of the world of Jesus? If we exclude or judge harshly that someone is not worth our time or our love, what does that say about their worth of God's love in their eyes? It's not enough for our mouths to say God loves you if our actions say I despise you, or I despise your choices, or I despise your lifestyle. We need to remember that one person influencing one other person does not ever stop there. Ever. Influencing one person inadvertently or otherwise always influences another and another and another. Worse than Chinese whispers. Just think of how addictions start. No one, when they have their first cigarette or alcoholic drink or try drugs for the first time, says, I want to be addicted to this stuff and not be able to live without it. Ever. No one ever says that. They see others smoking and seemingly happy, and maybe it's cool, and they think, why not? One can't hurt. They see others drinking and enjoying themselves. I could enjoy that also, they say. They see that the party could be an awesome event with some help. Why not try it this one time? Perhaps they see a way to cope or endure grief or heartache or disillusion or anger or feelings of unworthiness can't hurt, right? We've all heard of 6 degrees of separation, and I would suggest that when it comes to influence, it's often less than 2. Maybe less than that. This is why our yes should be yes, yes, and our no be no, no. No grey area. In other words, don't talk the talk if you're not going to walk the walk. Live the truth of your words, and you will bring truth and life to your actions as well. And you won't ever have to mention Jesus' name. Jesus says to the demon, "Come out of him and be still." Simple words. Come out, be still. But a powerful influence and resonance. He shows all who are present that he does not just speak of the power of God, but demonstrates it with belief, truth, love, and action. So how will you live the truth of the gospel in your life today? Just today. Don't worry about your whole life. That's too hard to think about straight up. Think about just today. How will you change your actions to more reflect that truth? And finally, my challenge for you. Easter is like 8 weeks away. 2 full moons. Well, a full moon today, so a full moon in 2 months. So after you've thought about your influence, your actions today, perhaps you can identify a behaviour you currently have or an action you currently do which is contrary to what you believe for whatever reason. Can you accept the challenge to change that behaviour by Easter? So plenty of time. You'll have all of Lent to pray about it. My suggestion might be to bring your behaviour or burden to God and lay it at the foot of the cross on Good Friday. All that it means for you, and just give it away to Jesus on the cross. And then, on Easter Day, unburdened, receive your Easter joy. Confident that you are no longer using that behaviour as a bad influence on yourself or others. And that you become a powerful messenger for Christ. So that's your challenge, stuff to think about as we journey towards Ash Wednesday and our Lenten discipline and reflection. The Lord be with you.